call ourselves Cash for Kids.
Oh yeah, LLC.
Why wasn't that reported to the court? That there was a civil rights investigation that concluded that Ms. Duvall's rights have been violated based in part on your conduct.
Didn't occur.
In your mind, is equal treatment the same as non-discrimination? Are they different?
Well, someone may need accommodations to access equal treatment. So what am I trained to do? It is not, there is not a specific, again, not a specific training that says, if client says X, do A. It is a general understanding.
To provide services for persons suffering emotional disabilities.
We provide services to everyone.
Answered, you have to go review policy. I'm simply asking, you may have been trained, you may not have been trained, you just simply don't recall sitting here right now.
That's correct.
And by way of your experience or training, if you can share with us, what type of emotional disabilities would you be referring to?
It's not something I have dealt with, so I really can't answer.
How about mental disabilities? What type of mental disabilities have you dealt with?
Are you asking me what kind of mental health problems my clients have that I've worked with?
I'm asking you to describe, in the disabled context, any individuals that tell you they're suffering a mental disability that requires accommodations.
I have never had a client request an accommodation for a mental health disability.
So, you have had clients, however, request accommodations for physical disabilities.
I've actually never had one that requested an accommodation that I can recall.
Reacting to this location, I'm requesting a change. What would your position be?
I would discuss it with my supervisor, what could be done.
You have no idea of what even is available, if anything, to the person making the request.
Again, I've never dealt with it, so I've never had to make the request or inquire.
Got it. And I understand that. But you also went through training, right?
Primarily
Yes.
when I am reading their documentation, there's a certain information that I look for typically. And it typically starts with the minute order. So I'll usually refer to the minute order, which is where I get my instructions. And then I'm making certain primarily that that information is contained in the report that's being presented to me.
What unit do you work with? You're not an ER supervisor, right?
No, I'm not.
What do you guys call your unit?
Continuing services.
What does continuing services do?
I am responsible for overseeing cases where primarily where family reunification and family maintenance services are in effect, but on occasion I also help facilitate PP services, permanency planning services. So I'm typically what they refer to the back end.
Okay. So when I see something in the policies or in the training that refers to back-end cases, that would be the work that you do.
That's correct.
It would include detention reports,
Yes,
also interim review reports,
that would be correct.
last-minute informations,
Yes,
status review reports.
yes.
Do you recall receiving any training regarding your affirmative duty to disclose exculpatory information to the court in your court reports?
That's part of the court report training.
Okay. And you've taken that training?
Yes.
What is exculpatory information, as far as you understand it, based on your training?
It's information that we gather to support an argument and or any findings, factual findings in a case.
That's exculpatory information?
That's my understanding.
What do you call information that would be favorable to the other side, like a parent in this case? What would you call that sort of information? If your agency is making allegations against a particular parent and there's some information that would undercut your allegations, that would be favorable to the parent, what do you call that?
I call that information, investigative information that needs to be reported. I could.
Okay, and then am I also correct that shortly after that warrant policy was released, the County of Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services undertook a regimen of training.
That would be correct.
And that training consisted of training to emergency response supervisors and continuing services supervisors also at some point, right?
That would be-
The last time that you had this warrant training.
It would have been that time that I don't recall specifically.
When was the first time that you recall having the training relative to Government Code Section 820.21?
If you could clarify that for me, I'd appreciate it.
That's the one that prohibits you and your workers from committing perjury, fabricating evidence, suppressing exculpatory evidence, or obtaining evidence by use of undue influence. Is that training? When do you
Okay.
recall first having that training?
I don't recall the exact time that I had that training.
Was it within the last 2 years?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you bring any training materials here with you today?
I did not.
Okay. Is there a reason you did not?
I wasn't aware that I needed to. Some may view that as choosing sides, but I don't see it as choosing sides.
Well, what do you view it as, ma'am, when a social worker to put exculpatory information in their court report so that the court report makes one parent appear a better caretaker than the other?
How do I feel about that?
My question reread?
Question, well, what do you view it as, ma'am, when a social worker fails to put exculpatory information in their court report so that the court report makes one parent appear a better caretaker than the other?
If that is purposeful, then that's not okay. If the information is unknown, then a social worker is bound to report what they are aware of.
I understand how you may feel, but let's just go through that. As a supervisor, you are sort of like the captain of your unit, right?
I don't see it that way, but okay, yes. I am the leader of the unit.
You are
yes.
the leader of the
Yeah.
unit. You have 5 or 6 people under you.
Yes, that's correct.
They look to you for instruction,
They
for
do.
counseling, and for guidance.
They do.
And in order to give you some method of enforcing your authority as their supervisor, you can discipline your social workers in some way if they don't follow your instructions, can't you?
I don't discipline them.
Let's back up and
Okay.
lay a little
I'm sorry.
foundation. That's okay. You've been a supervisor for 17 years. Yes?
That's correct.
And when you first became a supervisor, you got some training regarding how to be a supervisor, right?
That's correct.
And then over the course of the last 17 years, you've had recurrent training about how to be a supervisor,
That's
right?
correct.
How to command your unit, right?
Yes.
Okay. And part of that training, you learned that as a supervisor, you have the ability to met out some form of discipline to your social workers, whether that be counseling, a letter,
Yes.
recommendation for termination, right?
Meet out.
Right?
Meet out. Yes.
Okay. So I'll go back to my original question. If you found a social worker that purposefully suppressed exculpatory information, would you mete out discipline of any kind?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever done that before in the last 17 years that you've been a supervisor?
In terms of information that was purposefully detrimental to the client that was in a court report, is that what you're speaking?
I'm asking you if you've ever had a social worker who purposefully did not disclose exculpatory information in a court report. Have you ever had that happen that you know of?
What I can truly say, not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge. And if it did, would you discipline that person?
I would certainly conference with. I would certainly conference with. Certainly conference with my. Certainly conference with my. The best strategy to handle that would be my direct superior, which would be my ARA.
Okay. Interim review reports, though, you've reviewed hundreds of those, right?
I don't want to get caught up in numbers. I
With
don't
the-
recall any. I
with
don't
the-
recall any, actually.
What you did was speak to her about the report, right?
That's correct.
You didn't call anybody or verify anything. Aren't you also telling the court that you believe this information to be true?
Yes, I am.
That's why you put your signature on it.
That's correct.
To let the court know that a second set of eyes looked over this. It wasn't just the social worker.
That's correct.
Okay. Is that one of the safeguards that your agency has put in place to protect the rights of parents and children?
Yes.
And so we have a second set of eyes looking over what the social workers do to make sure that the social workers not only are meeting the statutory requirements in the forms, but also to ensure that they're being truthful, honest, accurate, and complete,
That
right?
would be correct.
And in order to ensure that this particular worker on this particular report was truthful, honest, accurate, and complete, all you did was speak to her about the report, right?
That's correct.
You didn't call anybody or verify anything with either Ms. Cohen or Mr. Weissman?
No, sir.
That's the Natalie Cohen letter. Coincidentally, the letter's dated November 15th, 2011. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
That's the day before this hearing for which you filed this last minute information, right? After the fact, to look at the situation and say, you know what, my subordinates, you guys, you've done something wrong, let's fix it. Did you have that ability, that authority?
I could.
Did you, in this case, undertake that effort to review the facts to decide a seizure was actually lawful?
That was not mine.
Recognize that report?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a detention report?
Okay, is that your signature there?
Yes, it is.
Anywhere near your signature does it say words to the effect of, I am informed and believe that the foregoing is true and correct?
Yes.
It does. Where?
Right on the top of the signature.
What I see is a statement that's unequivocal that says, I declare under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true and correct. What I'm asking you is, anywhere in this document, is there a qualification? Is there a statement that you don't have personal knowledge of the matters here, rather you're informed and believe them to be true? Is there that language that I am informed and believe these to be true?
No.
Okay. Recall generally having been trained that an unqualified statement of that which one does not know to be true is equivalent to a statement of that which one knows to be false.
I do not recall. The information is given to me.
Okay. You rely on your subordinates to be honest with you.
That's correct.
Okay. Am I correct that the reason that the County of Los Angeles implemented the use of structured decision-making tools was because they are critical to establishing and monitoring a consistent set of practice standards for the organization?
I believe so.
The objectives of the structured decision-making tools is to provide guidance in the decision to maintain children safely in the home of their parents.
One of the.
Okay.
Yes.
And one of the other objectives is to prevent children from entering into the child welfare system unnecessarily. Last time,
It
if you
is.
recall, receiving any kind of training at all relative to how the United States Constitution might apply to the work that you do as a government social worker.
I don't recall.
Most qualified, most knowledgeable to testify on behalf of the County of Los Angeles. You are that person, correct? With regard to the written child welfare policies we're dealing with here today.
Correct.
Okay. With regard to those policies for which you are the person most qualified in the County of Los Angeles to testify, am I correct that your expectations are not expressed in writing in those policies?
They're not expressed.
Is there any way in looking at this risk assessment tool that, according to the policies in effect in 2009, would mandate that the child be seized from the mother's care there and then without first getting a warrant?
I can't answer that question
Why not?
without.
Recommendation that's generated by the risk assessment tool, there should be a really good reason for it, right?
You would need to justify the reason why
It couldn't be just whimsically done, right?
it shouldn't be done whimsically.
And for the TDM with a mother, and she is just arguing with me, and I've had enough. I walk out of the room and I say, you know what, we're done. I'm just going to seize that child. That's not a good basis to do a discretionary override, is it? Just because I'm angry with the mom?
based on what you're saying, that limited little thing,
Yeah.
I would,
Supervisor's angry with the mom. Is that a good reason to do a discretionary override?
again, without being there, I really couldn't make that.
Well, let's reason through it. You were the policy manager for 13 years. I'm sure that you went through a lot of scenarios as you were putting together before you finally agreed, right?
At no time did I make that statement that you just said. No, I did not make that statement that you,
Make the statement that's recorded in your delivered service logs, did you?
not that.
Directly into the child's mouth. Did you tell the judge that in the report that you filed under penalty of perjury?
No, that statement is not in the detention.
Nothing even similar to that statement is in the detention report, is it?
Similar to that?
Decision was made to detain the child, right?
Correct,
That decision was made on November 3rd, correct?
correct.
Who made that decision?
I don't have the authority actually ultimately to detain the child myself. That decision is always made in consultation with the SCSW.
I didn't ask you whether or not you detained the child. I'm asking you, who made the decision to detain the child?
The decision was made in myself in consultation with the SCSW, Kimberly Rogers.
Okay. Did you make that decision before, during, or after the TDM?
Again, it's going back to that day, and based on the documents, it would have been probably during the time of the TDM. And again, I don't mean to sound nitpicky, but it would not have happened inside of the TDM, teen decision making.
Well, Ms. Duvall showed up at that TDM with her child in her arms, right?
Correct?
And she sat through that TDM and spoke with you for how long?
How long was the TDM?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you exactly. I don't remember exactly. Teen decision making meetings are generally at least an hour and a half, sometimes as long as 2 hours, rarely longer than 2 hours, but sometimes more.
And she left that TDM that day without her child, right?
Again, not to sound nitpicky, but she left the building without her child.
That TDM, her custody status had changed, right?
Correct?
At what point in time did it change? From the beginning to the end of the TDM, at what point in time did that custody change happen?
I could answer it to the best of my knowledge, more likely than not, but I can't tell you exactly when because it was so long ago. But more likely than not, these decisions are made towards the end of the teen decision-making meeting.
Toward the end of the meeting?
Correct?
When you told the court here, under penalty of perjury in your detention report, that Dr. Evans stated there were no identified organic reasons as to why the child would be diagnosed as failure to thrive, why didn't you also tell the court the balance of what she told you that day? That being that Dr. Evans stated it would be difficult to tell for sure at this point whether this was directly due to parents' neglect. Why didn't you tell the court that?
That was what is in the court report is a summary of the content.
In doing your summary, though, we leave out certain things. Like, for example, in doing this particular summary, you left out the fact that Dr. Evans specifically stated it would be difficult to tell for sure at this point whether the failure to thrive condition was directly due to parents' neglect. That was left out in your summary that you gave the court under penalty of perjury.
That actual statement was left out.
Right. Talking about when you say do not promote what?
Oh, what they're referring to is do not, what
Of child abuse and neglect have declined dramatically. As William Brangham tells us, advocates for child welfare are especially concerned about what this says about their safety. Before we continue, a warning. This segment is focused on a sensitive subject, and if there are younger viewers with you, you may want to take a moment to pause or opt out.
That's right, Judy. In normal times, it is difficult to cover child welfare and allegations of child abuse. Now, with a pandemic, it is even more difficult. We wanted to begin by sharing some of the stories and concerns that we heard from many people who are working to try to prevent that abuse. Here's some of what we heard.
My name is Kelly White. I'm the co-CEO at the Safe Alliance in Austin, Texas. We work across the issues of child abuse, sex trafficking, sexual assault, domestic violence. We are particularly concerned because if children are at risk in a home, nobody is seeing them now.
Hi, I'm Georgia Booth, and I am in New York City with the Children's Aid Society. One of our biggest concerns during this pandemic is the safety and well-being of children. We rely heavily on schools and physicians and other adults that are coming in contact with children on a regular basis to report incidences of child abuse and neglect.
Hi, this is Jim Dudley. I am in Redwood City, California, and currently I'm a lecturer on faculty at San Francisco State University. When I was with the police department, I was the captain of our child abuse prevention and investigation group. In COVID-19 days, we don't get those reports.
I'm Leah Fraley. I'm the executive director of Stop Child Abuse Now of Northern Virginia. Reports are going down, which makes sense, right? There's less reports because the front line of child protection really isn't in that child's life anymore. Reports are going down. That doesn't mean abuse is going down. Right? Just the reports.
I'm Xanthi Sharp. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Fuller Project. The Fuller Project is a global nonprofit newsroom that's dedicated to reporting on the issues that most impact women. During coronavirus, there's been a spike of 230% in the material online, which is child sexual abuse, which is being shared. And that's material that is on the publicly accessible web.
We had a call from a child protective services worker because of a young woman that had been in our teen parent program that's a part of our children's shelter and had left to go back to with her child to go back to her family, and now her someone from her family that had been sexually aggressive toward her was now sexually abusing her child. We got them into our family shelter in a second.
There has been a breakdown as far as the actors that are monitoring and taking down this child sexually abusive material online.
Crowded border facility in South Texas, where more than 3,000 migrant children are living, eating, and sleeping crammed shoulder to shoulder. Because of the pandemic, only 250 migrants are supposed to be allowed in this temporary processing facility. These are pods for unaccompanied minors.
Welcome to the HHS Health and Human Trafficking Symposium. I'm so excited.
I do my best to stay focused. Not a minute of my day goes by that I'm not working. You're working to survive.